What if I told you there was a year so devastating that it almost wiped out entire civilizations? Throughout history, we have witnessed countless catastrophic events, wars that tore nations apart, famines that claimed millions, plague that spread faster than they could be stopped. Yet some years stand out more than others, not because they were just tragic, but because they represented the absolute worst humanity had to endure. These are the years where survival itself seemed uncertain, and the very existence of civilization hung by a fragile thread. In today's video, we are going to discuss the worst year in history for each country. But before I start, if you are new to the channel and love history, definitely subscribe to the History Fact Show and press the bell icon. Thank you. What makes a year the worst? It's not just a matter of time, but the overwhelming suffering, devastation, and loss of life that define it. A year can be considered the worst for a nation when its people face unparalleled destruction, whether it's from war, disease, natural disaster, or economic collapse. It's a year that marks a significant turning point where everything that once seemed certain crumbles beneath the weight of hardship. So as we explore the worst years in history, we will look at how different people in different places and under different circumstances faced their darkest hours. The Black Death from 1347 to 1351. The continent was ravaged by a plague so devastating that it wiped out an estimated 30 to 60% of its population. This deadly pandemic, caused by the bacterium Yersinia pestis, spread rapidly across Europe via trade routes carried by fleas that infested rats, and soon became an unstoppable force of nature. As the plague surged across the land, fear gripped every heart. Whole communities were decimated, and the few survivors were left to manage the harrowing task of burying the dead in mass graves. In the absence of scientific knowledge, people turned to superstition, religious fervor, and often scapegoating to make sense of the catastrophe. The chaos was palpable. Entire families were wiped out in a matter of days, and villages, once thriving, became nothing more than ghost towns. The physical toll of the Black Death was catastrophic, but the long-lasting impacts were felt far beyond the immediate death toll. With such a large portion of the population gone, labor shortages crippled vital industries such as agriculture, construction, and trade. This created a ripple effect throughout Europe, leading to widespread economic disruption that would last for generations. The collapse of the old social order would eventually lay the groundwork for the transformation of Europe. The Great Chinese Famine lasted from 1959 to 1961, was the result of a combination of political decisions, misguided policies, and natural disasters, culminating in a catastrophe of unimaginable proportions. At the heart of this disaster were the policies of the Great Leap Forward, an ambitious program initiated by Mao Zedong with the goal of rapidly industrializing and collectivizing China's agriculture. The government's vision was to create vast communes where pieces would give up their land and work together to increase agricultural production. The plan was flawed from the outset, as it forced the rural population into collectivizing farming without regard to the practical realities of their labor and the land. The consequences of the neglect were catastrophic. Estimates suggest that 15 to 45 million people, a staggering portion of China's population, died from starvation and malnutrition. Entire communities were wiped out, and the countryside became a desolate landscape of death. Children born during the famine faced an upbringing marred by extreme poverty and malnutrition, while entire families were torn apart, leaving psychological and social scars that affected an entire generation. In British rule India, where in 1943, one of the most harrowing humanitarian disasters in the country's history unfolded, the Bengal famine. Unlike many other famines, this one wasn't caused by drought, flood, or any natural calamity. Instead, it was born of a toxic blend of war, colonial mismanagement, and calculated neglect. In 1943, food prices skyrocketed due to wartime inflation, rampant grain hoarding, and a crumbling distribution network. The crisis was worsened by policies that were either recklessly indifferent or actively harmful. One of the most devastating was the denial policy implemented by the British to thwart a possible Japanese invasion. It involved the forced removal or destruction of boats, rice stocks, and transportation infrastructure in coastal Bengal. Actions that crippled local food supply chains and left rural populations utterly stranded. By the time the famine ran its course, over 3 million people were dead. The images from that time were chilling. Emaciated children clinging to dying mothers, bodies laying unburied on city streets, an entire village reduced to ghost towns. The sheer scale of human suffering was staggering, but so too was the emotional and political fallout. By 1947, India would finally break free from British rule, but the memory of 1943, when an empire watched its colonial subjects starve to death, remains one of the darkest stains on the legacy to the British Empire. In the United States in 1863, a year that would become one of the bloodiest, most traumatic, and most transformative in the nation's history. Deep in the heart of the American Civil War, this was the year when the conflict reached a fever pitch, not just on the battlefield, but in the very soul of the nation. America was quite literally divided. The industrialized Union in the north and the agrarian confederacy in the south locked in a deadly struggle. At the root of it all was slavery, not just as a political issue, but as a moral crisis tearing the country apart. And 1863 was the crucible, the year when everything changed at a horrific cost. The bloodshed reached new heights. In July, the Battle of Gettysburg became the single deadliest clash ever fought on American soil. Over 50,000 soldiers were killed, wounded, or went missing in just 3 days. The fields of Pennsylvania were soaked in blood as cannons thundered and bodies piled up. But the suffering didn't end when the guns fell silent. Disease, starvation, and infection killed far more soldiers than combat. In camps and hospitals, men died in agony, often without medicine, sometimes without even a name. As we look back on these catastrophic years, from the Black Death in Europe to the Great Chinese Famine, from the Bengal Famine to the American Civil War, a haunting truth becomes clear. Suffering thrives where leadership fails, where truth is silenced, and where empathy is absent. We now live in a world where no crisis respects borders, whether it's pandemic, wars, climate change, or economic collapse. I hope you have an idea about the worst years in history. Comment and let me know which worst things in history you would like to learn about in the next video. Thanks for watching.